The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
From the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, this is Legends. I'm Jason Bryant. Prepare for a journey through wrestling's past, present, and future, as we'll hear the great stories of wrestling and success from the true legends of the sport here on Hall of Fame Legends. Known as Doc throughout the wrestling community, Dave Bennett got his start in wrestling as a member of the inaugural high school wrestling team at Jamestown High School in North Dakota in 1959. He was a conference place winner and qualified for the NAIA National Championships while attending Jamestown College. In 1963, he transferred to Pacific University in Oregon to finish his wrestling career. Bennett graduated with his bachelor's degree at Pacific before completing his doctorate in optometry in 1966. After continued study at the University of Washington and at the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Medicine, he went into a joint practice of ophthalmology in Kennewick, Washington in 1978. Doc blended a professional career with wrestling throughout his life, coaching high school teams from 1969 to 1990 and holding positions as a volunteer, assistant, and head wrestling coach at 5 different high schools. He helped coach over 40 wrestlers to high school state championships in 3 states. Through Sunkissed Kids, Bennett became involved in video scouting and technique analysis. He has produced over 60 instructional and educational tapes for coaches, athletes, and officials, featuring some of the top athletes and coaches in the world. He's also produced over 40 television shows for broadcast in the United States and abroad. In 1997, he gave up his medical practice to become a full-time staff member at USA Wrestling. 3 years later, he was named the National Development Freestyle Coach and honored as the United States Olympic Committee's Coach of the Year in 2008, receiving the Doc Councilman Award. He is the only wrestling coach to ever receive this prestigious award. Bennett continues to volunteer his services to USA Wrestling, United World Wrestling, and the National Wrestling Hall of Fame with digital media productions. He serves on USA Wrestling's volunteer coaching staff and the expert group for education for United World Wrestling, the international governing body for the sport of wrestling. 2015 Order of Merit recipient, Dave Doc Bennett. Now sitting here with Dave Doc Bennett, 2015 Order of Merit from the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. You've been involved in this organization for a very long time in production and putting together video packages, especially in the most recent few years. But 2015, you went in receiving the Order of Merit. What was it like to be on the other side of the coin for once?
Well, I guess the strangest part of it is usually I do the bios and things for the guys going in, and it's not quite appropriate to do your own. So I had to figure that out, and I got Doug Brooker from Iowa Public Television did my bio for me. So I found out what it was like all the way through to be on the other end, and it was different. And you realize how you think it's easy, but when you're the person that's being questioned, it's not always so easy.
Yeah, well, the scene that comes to mind is in Shawshank Redemption where they get Andy Dufresne something, or Andy Dufresne gets read something. He said, I had to go through one of your competitors, but just to keep it a secret, something like that, because you're the guy who usually goes out and does the production for these things, and to go around the horn to do it. That's the first thing that came to my mind. But we'll look back at your career, and it's very different than a lot of people in the sport of wrestling. The name Doc is not just a nickname. You are a doctor. You have been a wrestling coach for a long time. You've been a college coach. You've been a developmental coach. Let's just start right from the beginning. How did you discover the sport of wrestling?
Basketball coach.
That's usually not how wrestling stories begin, is with the word basketball coach.
Yeah, I wasn't a basketball coach, but I was in high school. I just starting into high school. And football season was over, and we were in PE class. And the basketball coach called me into his office, and he wanted to know if I was going to be turning out for basketball next week. And I said, I sure am. And he said, well, I'm going to save us both some time. You're cut now. He said, you'll never make a basketball player. And me being about in tears, I thought, well, that isn't even fair. And he said, but I'm going to make you a deal. He says, if you go meet Mr. Charbonneau here this next week, he's got a new sport that we're starting. And if you'll take and go try this sport out for a week, if you don't like it, if it doesn't fit you or suit you, he says, you don't have to come to PE the rest of the year and you got an A. And I thought, well, that's not too bad a deal. Give
Pretty
me an
good
extra hour
trade-off
in the afternoon, you know. So But he knew what he was doing because I fell in love with it the first day and just took to it. I was on the very first high school team that my high school ever had, and I think the fourth wrestling match or weight bout I ever saw was mine because I had 3 teammates went before me. I was the fourth weight class, and nobody on the team had ever seen a wrestling bout until we participated in our first duel.
And this is in North Dakota.
Yes, it was North Dakota.
And what year approximately? I'm going to say approximately because I don't want to make you feel that old.
Yeah, 57, 58.
Okay, so in that era, the opportunity comes through. You obviously took to the sport because you had some success enough to want to wrestle in college. Let's talk about how you took to the sport of wrestling, and then what did you realize? When did you realize that you were actually a wrestler?
I just knew I loved the sport. I knew that every year, every event, I was getting better. I knew that the progress was being made, and I just loved it. I loved the practice. I loved the time we put in. I just was something I just fell in love with, and it was a new sport, so we didn't get the opportunity to go to a lot of places that some of the other teams were going to. But I did have the opportunity to go to a kind of a tri-state type tournament my senior year, and that got me a little bit of attention. And I had the opportunity to go down and look at some schools. And I had thought I would go to Iowa State, not just for wrestling, but I was raised with a farming, ranching community. My grandfather raised me, and he was a farmer, rancher, and a peace officer. And he, I thought I might go to Iowa State. Was a big agricultural school, and I thought I might go down there. We had relatives in that area, and I went down and checked it out. And I thought, I don't know. It was kind of wild. It was kind of wild. I was a small town boy, and they were a little bit too quick for me in a lot of departments.
Ames was the big city for you back then.
Well, it wasn't just that. They were pretty crazy and wild guys on that team back then. And so I finally settled in. I looked at several things. I had an appointment to the Air Force Academy, and Columbia University had contacted me about coming to Columbia, and I'd never heard of anything going. I didn't want to go back east, but I did well on my SATs, and I think that was the fact I was a wrestler is probably why they contacted me. And I went down to the Air Force Academy, decided I didn't want to be a plebe, and so I was going to go to Morehead State. And about the time I was ready to get that all completed, a fellow that had been my high school hero called me and said he'd just taken the coaching job at Jamestown College and would like me to come and wrestle for him. Now, he hadn't wrestled in high school there, but he was a big athlete there. But he wrestled in college and did real well. And so the opportunity to go work with him, he just sounded too good to pass up. So I called Morehead State, and he said, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. And I ended up going to Jamestown College. And after the second year, he decided he was going to coach high school. And so I went, when he left the college, I did too. I headed west. I went out to Portland, Oregon, and finished up at Pacific University, and got acquainted with the Multnomah Athletic Club there and introduced to freestyle and Greco, and it just expanded my world of wrestling. And it just seems like everything in my life, just one thing led me to another in the sport of wrestling, and it's been a great ride.
All the while involved with wrestling, as you get out of college and discovering freestyle and Greco, you turn to your profession, which you became your nickname, Dr. Dave Bennett. Why did you choose the particular field of, I guess would be optometry, correct?
Well, they had we had a couple guys in the wrestling team whose dad, I had a kid that I knew in the wrestling team, his dad and brother were ODs. And I went and visited with them, and I thought, this doesn't look like too bad a deal here. This looks like it'd be a good, clean way to make a living. And so I went, I checked it out, and I had what it took to be accepted to the school, and they had wrestling. So when I transferred there because they not only had a wrestling team, they had a school of optometry, and so I went into optometry, and then I went back to school, increased my education. I eventually ended up practicing with ophthalmology in Tri-Cities in Washington. I was co-owner of the clinic with an ophthalmologist there, and I worked in surgery with him and mostly a medical type practice, even though I started out as an OD.
And all the while with the wrestling competition, you're in an era where the Nationals is pretty much an open tournament. If you want to go out there, you can, based on which level your school is. And let's talk about some of the guys that you scrap with during the day that are known. I mean, there's some guy that was also at Moorhead State around your era that would have been there.
Bucky Mon, yeah, Bucky Mon was at Moorhead State, and I'd never got the opportunity to wrestle with him. I always wanted to. It's back at the national tournament. My problem there was the Pennsylvania boys. I'll tell you what, they were tough. We had, Gray Simons and Freddie Powell and John Day. These are the guys that were dominating the scene at that point in time.
And Pacific was an NAIA school at the time?
Well, this was when I was at Jamestown College.
Okay, Jamestown's still NAIA.
Pacific was in NAIA also. But, the guys in that area you scrap with were like Rick Sanders. And I think my last match was I think it was Darrell Keller. But it's my things that happen in your life. When I was a freshman in the NAIA, I got there and I had to cut some weight, and I found a guy to cut weight with, and the guy that I was cutting weight with was a guy by the name of Bobby Douglas.
Yeah, who at the time was wrestling at West Liberty State College.
Yes, he was at West Liberty. And so over the years, and I got to know Joe C. And over the years I made these acquaintances, and I never got out of the sport. When I finished my professional schooling, I went into practice. I set up my schedule to where I would quit seeing patients at 2:00 in the afternoon, so I could go down to the local high school. And I started out by just going in and working out with kids, like you would when you're younger like that. And I just wrestled with them, take two of them over in the corner and wrestle with them. And then I started helping coach. And then the next thing you know, I asked to be an assistant coach. And before long, they'd ask me if I'd take a head coaching job. So over the years, I was a lay coach, assistant coach, head coach at several different high schools. And so I never got out of the sport, and I started a club because my kids were coming up, and I wanted to have a club locally. And I had one of the first USWF clubs in that part of the country. And so we got involved with that, and then Darrell Keller and I became real close friends, and he was my assistant coach for years at a couple of the different high schools.
It's a pretty good staff to have, a guy to have on your squad.
And I think it really enhanced my wrestling skills. And in about 1984, about the time of the Olympics, Joe C. and Bobby Douglas reached out to me. Joe C. came up to the house, and they had Art Martori fly me down to Phoenix. I met with Art Martori, and I had started at that time, along with Darrell and Dwayne Keller. We had been visiting and said, it's too bad we don't have all this technique we used to do when we could really do it, And so we got the idea of getting some of these better athletes and getting them to lay their technique down while they were still active. And we started doing that, and I started doing some scouting stuff and analyzing video. And so Art brought me down there, and I got involved with Sunkist Kids, working with them from the standpoint of technical videos and scouting video and things like that. Still coaching high school and coaching my club. And so I worked with Sunkist, and that led me to USA Wrestling wanting me to begin to do the same thing, and FILA, and they started taking me over, and I started doing these technical instructional scouting for the USA, as well as doing technical instructional things for the officials, as well as the athletic things for FILA and for USA. We did a number of instructional tapes there, and Jim Shear, when he, originally Dave Miller tried to get me to come down there, and I wasn't ready to do that at the time. I still had a youngster in high school, but Jim Shear hit me about the right time. I didn't have any kids left in school, and he came up and he says, you're spending so much time on this, you love it, why don't you just go full-time with it and come down to USA Wrestling? We'd like to start a broadcasting department. You could be director of broadcasting and still do some volunteer coaching and things like that. And I got down there, and then the next thing I know, I'm asked if I'd like to be the National Developmental Freestyle Coach, and I ended up being able to work in broadcast and be the National Developmental Freestyle Coach. And odd part is I never applied for a single job in my life. Every one of them, they just came and asked me if I'd like to do it.
So when did you cease operations with your optometry?
Mid-'90s. Yeah, mid-'90s. I moved full-time to Colorado Springs.
So you had your pretty long career fixing people's eyes.
Well, yeah, I was in practice 20 some years.
And you've always got you still stay up to date on the the tech behind the eyewear? Because you've always got something slick that's different with your glasses.
I haven't really stayed very tech. I have enough trouble trying.
Maybe not tech, but just fashion savvy.
Yeah.
You had those green ones in Baku. I remember when I first met you in 2007.
Yeah, well, you got to do something a little different once in a while. But
well, they matched your green shoes.
Yeah. And the green jacket, I think.
That's true. That's true. Now, when the opportunity comes in, and this is where the technological stuff comes in, when video starts becoming more, I guess, affordable in some respects, gone are the days of the 8 millimeter and the 60 millimeter, and then Betamax is the higher quality VHS for transport and price, I guess, for lack of a better term. When did you realize that you kind of became a little bit of a video snob and kind of a collector of video equipment all the while, so you can say, I'm going to get this cool tool to make this video this much better?
Well, I recognize the fact that
it's called gear acquisition syndrome.
Yeah, I recognize the fact early on that you not only had to understand how to shoot wrestling, you had to understand, if you don't understand the sport, it's pretty hard to do a good job of shooting it, because you can't anticipate what direction you're going or what's going on. You really got to be able to understand that, and I recognize that. But I also recognize the fact that the better the camera, the better the equipment, the better the quality was to work with when you're going to step on it, when you're going to you're going to be maybe having to take it down a generation 2 or 3, and if you start with something better, you're going to end up with something better. And so I started thinking, I'm going to start acquiring this stuff in a good format, and we switched to the broadcast system. We had 1-inch tapes, we had 3/4 decks, and then we had Beta and Beta SP, and it was all linear editing to start with. And then when they came out with nonlinear, we had one of the first nonlinear systems. But it was certainly not anything that paid for itself by any means. I don't think I ever made a dime off anything I did that way. But at the time, I was still practicing, and it was, at least I could write it off.
When USA Wrestling decides to bring you on board, and the dual role that you've had up till your retirement was video and developmental coach, how did you merge those two together?
Well, when we started out, we were doing quite a few television shows. We were doing the Big 12, we were doing the Big 10, plus the USA Nationals and Trials.
Goodwill Games, too? Was that under y'all's
banner? Yeah, we did Goodwill Games one time, too, and the World Championships. I was doing that. I did that for Eurosports a couple times and for Turner and whatnot. But Doug Brooker and I decided I couldn't do it all, so I talked to Doug Brooker, who was with Iowa Public Television, and I thought, this can be better if I produce this stuff and let him direct it, not try to wear two hats. So I kind of stepped into the role of organizing and producing it and let him direct it, and that allowed me to be able to work a little more efficiently and stay on top of things a little better, because unlike most things you see nowadays where, like, the NCAAs, for example, they show it from start to finish. Doesn't make any difference how long it is. But with ESPN and Fox and these places we were dealing with, I had an hour time slot with 12 minutes of commercials, and it better fit that, and they didn't want you, it had to make sense too. So you had to figure out how you're going to get all those in it, and you had to pick up wild lines, know where to join the action, when not to, and which ones to show complete and which ones not to. And you had to make those decisions fast. And I found if I was directing, it was hard to do. So I would produce, and I would make those decisions on the fly rather than having to worry about directing on the fly.
And that's one thing. Even today, the price of television, even though there's cord cutters and whatnot, and there's talk, how ESPN's losing subscribers because of people are going to a la carte type of systems. But in that era, we're still in the same situation where a lot of times you got to pay for the airtime, or the time slot is expensive. So they give you, you're lucky to get the hour to start with, and then it's costly. How do you find that balance between, cost efficiency from a production standpoint to what the wrestling fan really wants to see?
Well, you've got to go by what the network wants to air. It doesn't make any difference what the fan wants to see. If the network has a guideline or a standard, if it's going to play on the air, it better meet their guidelines. And there's a big difference in that today, because a lot of these places, they don't have those same kind of standards anymore, because it's not standard definition, it's high definition, and so many of these cameras shoot better quality now, and they can make it fit or they can make it adjusted. But first thing they did when we sent them a show was they put it on the meters and the scopes, and if it didn't fall within certain guidelines, it wasn't getting aired. And we had a deal, the way we worked it out was we had a deal where if we would get the production done, they would air it. So we didn't have to pay for the airtime. But and we'd get one or two of the commercial spots, and they had the rest. And
so probably a Cliff Keen ad or a J-Rob ad, kind of like what we see today still.
Exactly. Which same kind of thing you have with the Big Ten now, kind of. But it was it worked out well, and of course I was still doing, and it was good for me because I was still doing a lot of scouting and video analysis, for the national teams, and that was one of the key roles I played. Was I would break down, I would pick out, take a look at who I thought the top 6, 7 guys in the worlds were going to be, and we would put together 8 or 9 or 10 matches of those guys throughout the year that were worth analyzing because when they're at the New York AC, they're shopping. When they're at the Sunkist, they're shopping. That isn't anything that's real useful compared.
You want a Continental or a World or a Junior World or a Euregan.
Yes, you need a Euregan, a World Championship, a World Cup. You need those kinds of bouts to really get a good analysis on the guys because they're peaking, they're ready to go.
They come to the U.S., they're on vacation.
Right. So we would, except for the World Cup, and that's where the World Cup was so much better then because everybody wrestled everybody. You get 5 or 6 good bouts where it wasn't pools in the World Cup at that time. So we could get a lot of information out of that. And I began to learn how to analyze the video. And that's a question I get asked a lot is, what are you looking for in a video? And a lot of people, he's got a great high crotch. He's got, it's to the right side. And yeah, he's a lefty, or he's a righty, or he's a left leg lead, a right leg lead. His best move is this. Well, those things are all important, but the most important thing most of them miss, and that's the fact is what did they do to create the situation where they have the opportunity to score. It isn't just the shot. It isn't just the score. It's what created the situation. Did they do something that created that situation, or did it happen by accident? And most of the time, it doesn't happen by accident. It's keyed by something. And finding those things that what they're keying off is what really makes a difference in being able to analyze and pull out what's happening.
So almost say, to draw a comparison to poker, it's what's the tell? What's their where do they give away their hand? It's like, is it a foot shuffle here? Do they change their stance here right before they shoot the high crotch? That type of stuff.
Exactly.
How much do you think that video analysis that you were doing made an impact on, especially the cadet and junior levels, on improving? And once they brought the cadet world championships back and the juniors had become real tough, where do you think that analysis played with the developmental of the junior athletes to get to become elite level senior wrestlers?
Yeah, I don't know I don't know how to evaluate that or how to say it. I think that from a developmental standpoint, I think that made the biggest difference for us was getting these guys matches at that level with calibers of that athlete. I think getting these guys into competition where they could wrestle these international guys before they're senior athletes. And I think that's what made the biggest difference there. And it's to me, there's so many ways to look at it, and I've always, as a coach, I've always felt it's better to not reinvent the wheel. As a coach, what I want to do is I'm going to identify what skills that individual has, and then I'm going to hone those skills. I'm not going to try to give them a whole new set. By the time you get your hands on that athlete nowadays, he's probably been wrestling since he's 5 or 6 years of age. And when he's 16, 17, you can have an effect there. But by the time they get into college, university age, they're really starting to get set in their ways. And so rather than trying to reinvent the whole wheel, what you do is you try to plug the holes, correct the mistakes. But the main thing is really hone the skills that they have so that they can bring those things that they can do into play. I've always said that a champion, has the ability to impose his will on his opponent at his discretion. If he can do that, then he's going to win some matches. And I think that comes from being able to bring the game into your court. In other words, you wrestle the match your way, not their way. You don't let them control the action. You don't let them control the tie. You don't let them control the pace. And you sure don't let them out-condition or out-strength you. Those are things you can control. You can't control how much talent God gave you, but you can sure control how hard you work, how strong you are, how flexible you are. You can to a certain extent with proper training, and strength is something you can change, and conditioning is a paramount.
All those things brought into one wrestler is a guy who came to you and Terry Brands as a high school kid. He ended up winning an Olympic gold medal, named Henry Cejudo. What was your first reaction to when Henry and his brother Angel showed up to the training center?
Well, they didn't just show up there. I went and got them. Yeah, that was not an accident. I had been watching Henry since he was younger, and Angel, and I knew Angel wasn't going to be going to college, and so I reached out to suggest that he might be interested in coming to the training center. So he came up to my house. Another fellow, Tracy something or other, brought him up to the house.
Tracy Grafe.
Yeah, Tracy Grafe used to drive him around, brought him up to the house. And I visited with Angel and decided that he was going to come to the training center and was going to enter the resident program. And Terry didn't know a whole lot about him, but he trusted me on the situation. So actually, I don't think Terry was there then. I think it was Sergey. I was kind of doing it because I think Sergey was there then. And so Angel was coming up, and I looked at Angel and I said, the other thing I do to Angel, you show up 30 pounds later or don't come. He was chunky.
He liked to balloon. That's for sure.
Henry always said Angel had a knife and fork problem. I don't know if that's the case or not, but he was talent wise. You didn't get any better than Angel. He had some real talent. He was technically really, really strong and really talented. But he calls me up and he says Henry wants to come, and I said, well, I want him to come, but he's got 2 years of high school left. No, he said he wants to come now. And I said, well, I don't know about that. And he said, well, he wants to come. And I got to thinking about it. And I knew a fellow that I knew down there, Joe Romero, who had wrestled at Arizona State. And I knew him. And he had worked with both of them as younger kids. And so I called up Joe. And I said, Joe, help me out here. I says, Angel Cejudo's coming up. And I says, he said Henry wants to come now. And he said, well, if you can get him now, you better grab him because he'll never get there if you don't. He said he runs with a bad crowd. He's a little gangbanger, and the best thing you can do is change his environment. If you can get him up there, you get him up there now. So that got me thinking a little bit along a different line. So I went into Rich Bender, and I said, I want to bring up a young man that's a sophomore in high school. And I'd already started bringing in guys for a year after high school before they college. So I'd already laid some groundwork there.
Kind of creating a gap year, so to speak, for wrestlers.
Yeah, I kind of a gray shirt thing. I'd already started that. And so Bender says, well, you're going to have to sell the USOC on it. I'm not going to. So I got thinking, how am I going to do this? And I went to sit in the sauna one day, and Apollo Ono was sitting there with me. And I looked at him, and I said,
the speed skater, for those who are unfamiliar.
Yeah. I looked at him and said, how old were you when you first came here? He said, 15. And I said, oh, we got a precedent. So I went into him, and based upon that precedent and upon pre-agreed terms, Henry could come.
Based on a sauna visit with Apollo Anton Ono. Yep. That's how speed skating helps wrestling.
That's how speed
Never see that narrative anywhere.
No, you don't. I've read the book, and there's a lot of things in the book. When the guy talked to me, I didn't really give him much time or talk to him because
Henry's book?
Yeah,
okay.
Because I told him, I said, you want the truth or a good story? And he was interested in the good story. And, he talked about the girls, seen him at the girls' camp, national coach, but baloney. It was all done before then. He never saw a girl in the camp until he was already coming to the training center. But in any event, Henry came up, and I thought, well, how am I going to do this? So I placed him in a good Christian home for a while, and he was like culture shock. I didn't put him at training center to start with.
Did you put him with the Beer X?
I put him with the Beer X.
That's all you had.
and so we had some real culture shock there for a while. But it worked out, and then he hooked into a kind of a mentor, and we got the school thing figured out, and Henry was there. And it was I had a lot of good times by having him there, and I had a few hard times having him there. But in the end, Henry rose to the occasion, did the right things, and got the job done. The
headaches that are with raising teenagers, which as a parent you'd been through.
Oh, I tell you what, we had some challenges.
Now, what's interesting is through Henry's the wrestling precedent, he goes to Coronado High School his last 2 years.
Yes.
Sleepwalks his way to 2 state titles. Since then, athletes who are residents at the training center cannot compete in Colorado high school activities in that sport. Now, hypothetically, Kyle Snyder, when he was at the training center senior, he could have played football or soccer or something. He just couldn't have wrestled.
Correct.
Hence called the Cejudo rule. Not that in name, but they wanted to make sure that schools weren't going to bring in ringers anymore.
And I never really understood what the problem was, because he could have just as easily moved in there as an outsider. What difference is it? It's not like he came in as a senior. He came in as a sophomore. End of his sophomore year. He spent 2 years in the system. And it wasn't like he didn't go to high school practice, because he did. That was part of the deal. We had him in the high school room.
But there was the situations where the Metro tournament, which is, for those who are unfamiliar, it's a Colorado Springs tournament run by USA Wrestling for all the local high schools of various sizes from, I guess, 5A down to 2A, whatever they have. I don't even know anymore. But Henry didn't wrestle one year because, he's going to Belarus. Or so. It was like he had to miss this high school tournament.
Took him to Krasnoyarsk.
To Krasnoyarsk, yeah, for the Urigan or something like that.
Yeah.
That's got to be something that, again, precedent is being set. And what did you learn through this whole process with Henry?
I came up with what I thought would be a good way to deal with this situation in the future to really develop some potential athletes. And I think the thought that we came up with is a good one because Kyle Schneider proved it the second time. And I had a game plan that I wanted to. I left it with Zeke, but I had a game plan I wanted to where we're going to bring in some kids with the idea of bring them in for a year or two, then they go to college, then they come back, not take a redshirt at the training center, a year there maybe in high school, a year redshirt, or maybe 2 years in high school redshirt, then go to college, come back. And we had to figure out to where they could get 3 Olympic cycles in, 4 years of college wrestling, and still only be 27, 28 years of age. And I should show you the outline sometime, but it really pencils out, it works. But the big issue you have is the social integration from the standpoint of putting 16, 17, 18-year-old kids in the same environment with 27, 28-year-old,
adults.
26-year-old adults. It has its issues.
Well, wasn't there an issue a lot with when they started putting some of the younger women's developmental athletes and they said, no, you're going to Northern Michigan before you even step foot on this campus again.
Right. Yeah, it's something they learned. But yes, that's right. So that's an issue that you have to work out. But I think they're trying to work it out and looking at starting a kind of an elite developmental type athlete is what they're looking at right now. But Henry was I learned a lot from him. It was a interesting experience, a good one, and we have a good relationship. I don't think Henry has any bad feelings about anything that happened during those times, and I know I don't. It was a work at times, but it was a pure work of love and joy.
Circling back to the Hall of Fame, what's the phone call like? Who calls you? How do you find out that you're going to be honored with the Order of Merit back in 2015?
Leroy, 2015. Leroy called me and told me, and it was kind of a surprise for me because I never expected it. When you work for USA Wrestling and you do work for the Hall of Fame, you don't really expect this kind of thing is going to happen.
So you're almost feel like you might be even disqualified because you're the one doing all the work with people.
Exactly. You think you're probably disqualified, and the interesting thing for me is, and it's I've been able to do so many different things, and I praise God for it because I don't know why He's blessed me and put these opportunities in my life, but if people look at me, the first thing they think of is a videographer, a guy that's been able to produce a lot of technical and educational materials and things like that. But I've never thought of myself that way. My heart's always been as a coach. And even the video for me, it's coaching. For me, the video was a tool that made me a better coach. It made Bruce Burnett a better coach. I started sharing that stuff with Bruce before he was national team coach, and we spent a lot of time together doing things. He and I put together a video syllabus that's I still think one of the best ones that's been out there years ago. And I think it gives you an opportunity to give kids a different kind of an education. It's able to give techniques and thoughts and materials to other coaches that they normally wouldn't get without doing a lot of traveling or spend a lot of money. And I see it as a coaching more than I do anything else.
How much do you feel that your hands, your fingerprints are on things that'll leave a lasting impression, not just on USA Wrestling, but the sport as a whole?
I don't know. I've had guys like, Bobby Douglas has told me I've left a lasting impression. Leroy does. And, a lot of people have, Bruce has, Bill Zadig thanks me a lot. David Taylor. I mean, there's a lot of guys in there that I had my fingers on and had a lot of work with, athlete and coaches. And, I hope so. I hope it's had an effect, but not for me. My whole ambition has been that when I'm done with this sport, I'm just hoping that the sport's better off because I was a part of it than if I hadn't been. That's really what it's all about. It's not. It's never been about accolades or awards. It's never been about, you don't go into something and think, well, maybe if I'm good enough, I'm going to get this. You do something because you love it if you're doing it right. And I just love the sport. And I've had some good serendipities. Going in the Hall of Fame was a great serendipity, and one of the biggest one was after the Olympics in 2008. I was the 2009 USOC Coach of the Year. I received the Doc Councilman. We're only wrestling coaches ever gotten it, and I can thank Henry for part of that, I'm sure. And it was based upon that fact. I think that Henry got a gold, and that also the fact that I used a lot of modern technology and scouting and preparation and things like that, because that's what the Doc Councilman Award is. It's science and coaching. But I was that was a serendipity. I certainly never expected that. They give one for each sport, and I had received the one for wrestling a couple times, and I thought, well, gee, this is nice. But the guy called me and he says, you're going to be the USOC Coach of the Year, Doc Councilman Award for 2008. And I said, oh, I've had it before. He said, oh, no, you haven't had this before.
Not this one.
No. And I thought, oh my goodness. And it was a real special thing, just like the Hall of Fame. And those things give you very, special moments, but the real moments are the friends you make, the people you meet, the athletes you've been able to touch and work with. And it's when you get a letter from a kid like a Matt Pell that says, thanks you when he's done with his college career, or you get a David Taylor that asks you to give his award presentation. It's when these athletes come back to you and thank you for the time you spent for them. That's the real reward. It's the joy of knowing you've helped somebody do something they love and get better at.
It's been 2 years since you've gone in. Now that you're back, this is the first time you've been back since then. Last year was the 40th. Now you've seen the renovated facility. What do you think the renovations and the way that the Hall of Fame is now laid out is going to do for the Hall of Fame's relevance? You as now an inductee, what do you think this is going to do for the sport of wrestling, and is the whole changeover?
I think the changeover brings it into the 21st century is what it does. I think it brings modern technology into it. I think it really is, it enhances the scope of it. It opens it up. I never dreamed they had the ability to put what they've got in there in that building, and it's a really unique experience. There's more interactivity. There's more things to hold your attention. I still like to see some of the old artifacts, the old museum pieces. I like to have that, and they do that. But now they got the opportunity to kind of change them out to go with different things that are going on. I think it gives reason for people to not go once and say, well, I've seen it. No, it gives a reason for people to go back and see what's been added, what's new. And I think it's a good change, and I think it's going to be a lot of increased interest in the hall because of it.
When you walk in and you go and look at things, and what's it like to go now to the Order of Merit? You sit there and you can punch your name in, and boom, there it is, Dave Doc Bennett, right there on the wall in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. Because I know you've done it. Well, of course I've done it. You've got to see what they did with it. It's the same thing, except it's not the plaque; it's on the screen. But it's nice. But I was in there today, and I shot a picture of Lincoln McElravy on the wall, and I sent it off to him. Lincoln and I have been real close since I was able to work with him. I worked with him years ago, both as a coach and both co-coached together, and I coached him as an athlete, both. But I sent the picture to him, and he was impressed by how they've changed all that stuff. And so it's just it's an awesome experience. To me, the neat part of being a part of the Hall of Fame or being enshrined in the Hall of Fame is that when you're gone, I'm going to be there with a lot of friends and people that I knew and had relationship with, and I'm going to be there with them. The memory will be there, and if maybe not with the world, but with the family and friends and people that I knew. Legends is presented by the National Wrestling Hall of Fame and produced by the Mat Talk Podcast Network. If you want to hear more from wrestling's legends, contribute to this ongoing project at halloffamelegends.org/contribute. One-time and small monthly donation options are available. We hope you've enjoyed this look into wrestling history. This has been Legends. I'm Jason Bryant.